Today was a wonderful day and a victorious day for us. They tried to stop us. They told us we couldn't march on the Pepsi Center. They tried to silence us. They tried to silence dissent. They tried to silence democracy. But democracy triumphed today. You triumphed today. And dissent triumphed. They did not put us in a cage today. And for all those who were on the fence, for all those who might have been afraid to come to the demonstration today, because of all that they did, they have more courage within their hearts and ready to step over that line now because of what you did today. Not only people in Denver, but people all over this country, people all over this world were affected by what you did on the streets today. Remember that. So I wrote this introduction in 2005. I began speaking out against the war in Iraq before it even began, as many of you did. Let me just read the introduction to 4th of July that I wrote in 2005. I'm not going to read the whole, I'm going to read an abbreviated version of it to you, but please listen. This is written in 2005, so just take note of that. Thank you. Actually, before this introduction, there's a poem at the beginning of the book. I wrote the book in the fall of 1974 on a $42 typewriter that a boy Sears and Roebuck in Santa Monica, California. And it was the height of the anti-war movement. I'd been arrested many times already by then. We had been to Miami, we'd been thrown out of the convention for shouting down Richard Nixon. And I was yet to actually speak at a convention. Somehow, amazingly, I addressed the 1976 Democratic Convention in New York. I seconded the nomination of a very courageous draft resistor, Fritz Efor, for Vice President of the United States in front of the entire convention and the rest of the country. So with the Amnesty Group, we were able to honor a man of conscience, and a man who chose to leave this country rather than fight in an immoral and illegal war. And so the poem that I wrote went like this. Let's see if I can do it from memory. I am the living death, your Memorial Day on wheels. I am your Yankee Doodle Dandy, your John Wayne come home, your 4th of July firecracker exploding in the grave. It was exactly 40 years ago this past September that I left my house in Massapequa, New York to join the United States Marine Corps and begin an extraordinary journey that was to lead me into a disastrous war which would change my life and others of my generation profoundly and forever. There are times in the lives of both individuals and nations when we cross certain thresholds where there is no going back, no return to the innocence we once knew. The change is utter and irreconcilable. We often sense these moments. I know I did that day. I can still remember leaving my house that morning, my father driving me down to the Long Island Railroad station with only a few words being said between us. Dad was always that way. And then that long and contemplative ride into the city, being sworn in at Whitehall Street, holding my right hand up proudly with the other young men, taking the oath of enlistment and swearing our allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. The fall of 1964, September 2nd, a lifetime ago. That last bright and beautiful morning when everything was to change forever. That last moment of light-hearted innocence, of youth, of Massapequa and the backyard before the shock, the chaos, and the deluge. I had just turned 18 that summer, and there are some old black and white photographs of me from those days. It's amazing that I still have them, considering I've misplaced them many times over the years, thinking them lost forever, only to later find them in some unexpected place, like a deeply disturbing dream that I had been trying to repress. I remember seeing those photos on several occasions, and each time having terrible nightmares that shook me badly. I couldn't look at them, could not face that young man I had been before the war and my injury. I would always promise myself to never look at them again. My trauma was still very deep. And that beautiful boy, That body had been destroyed, defiled, and savaged. My wounding in Vietnam, both physically and emotionally, haunted me, pursued me, and threatened to overwhelm me. I wrote Born on the 4th of July in the fall of 1974 in 1 month, 3 weeks, and 2 days. On a $42 manual typewriter, I had boarded Sears and Roebuck in Santa Monica, California. It was like an explosion, a dam bursting. Everything flowed beautifully, just kept pouring out, almost effortlessly, passionately, desperately. I worked with an intensity and fury as if it was my last will and testament. And in many ways, I felt it was. I continued to suffer from nightmares, constant anxiety attacks, severe heart palpitations, and a powerful, almost obsessive feeling that I would not live past my 30th birthday. I was living each day as if it were my last, as if everything had been compressed together by the war. And now every second counted. I wrote all night long, 7 days a week, single space, no paragraphs, front and back of the pages, pounding the keys so hard that the tips of my fingers would hurt. I couldn't stop writing, and I remember feeling more alive than I had ever felt. Convinced that I was destined to die young, I struggled to leave something of meaning behind, to rise above the darkness and despair. I wanted people to understand. I wanted to share with them as nakedly and openly and intimately as possible what I had gone through, what I had endured. I wanted them to know what it really meant to be in a war, to be shot and wounded, to be fighting for my life on the intensive care ward. Not the myth we had grown up believing. I wanted people to know about the hospitals and the enema room, about why I had become opposed to the war, why I had grown more and more committed to peace and nonviolence. I had been beaten by the police and arrested 12 times for protesting the war, and I had spent many nights in jail in my wheelchair. I had been called a communist and a traitor simply for trying to tell the truth about what had happened in that war, but I refused to be intimidated. I loved the night, and I would write for hours as if no time had passed at all. I was exhausted and my back ached, but none of that seemed to matter. I felt wonderful inside, tired but completely consumed by my writing. I would drink a couple of cups of coffee, and then with a new surge of energy, work for another hour or so in the bright lights of the morning, as the bright lights of the morning began to fill the room. I neatly stacked all the pages next to the typewriter after holding them proudly in my hands, then go back to my bedroom and transfer out of my wheelchair onto a mattress on the floor. I remember thinking to myself one morning that if I died in my sleep, someone would come into the apartment and find those pages next to the typewriter and know that I was not a victim, but someone who had been trying to move beyond his terrible tragedy and the terrible injustice of that war. I'm going to read what I wrote in 2005. I'm going to read the numbers who died in these figures, but I want you to respond as I read to what's happening today. Together, all of you collectively, please respond to this, correct these numbers so that we all get a perspective, a sense of how many more have died in this senseless and immoral war. For the past 2 years, we have been involved in a tragic and senseless war in Iraq. As of this writing, 1,500 Americans have died. 4,000. And more than 11,000 have been wounded. The 30,000 estimate, maybe more. While tens of thousands of innocent Iraqi civilians, many of them women and children, have been killed, over a million have died. And let me remind you that over 2 million, perhaps 3 million, died in Vietnam.